Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. We're just getting started this evening. All right. Um, have someone here already, so people tend to go in and out a little bit. Now, I put a thing up and I put a card to my testimony because that's really going to be useful given tonight's topic. And so I actually put that in. Um, and so if you didn't see the card to that, testimony is online. You can view it on the channel. It's going to be really useful given what we're talking about. This is in my usual wagon house, and actually, um, this deals with an argument that a lot of British Israelis groups use. Black Hebrew Israelites use this group. This basic type of argument. And it really deals with two verses in Revelation, and so we're gonna tackle that and get a background on some of this, and I'm gonna approach it in a way that I hope gives you a little bit of historic background to John, and really what's going on there. And so this may seem of very little interest to you, but really I view this, and I'm not saying that the people are necessarily demonic. I think most are deceived. I really view this as just another attack on the Jewish people. This is a hermeneutical attack on the identity of the Jewish people, and it really concerns me greatly. Dr. Brown has weighed in on this, probably for much the same reason. So we're going to be dealing with the topic of, does Revelation 2:9 and 3:9 teach that the Jewish people are not Jews? Which is the claim that some make. We're just going to start digging in. It's getting close to the holidays. People may be busy. Um, the first thing we're going to end up dealing with is that the verses in question, and you can look them up yourself, talk about the Jews not being Jews. Actually, let me just turn to it here and read it to you. This might be the best way to go. And I still have access to my phone Bible. So I'm going to look down for just a split second here, move the computer up, and pull up the verses in question, because I think that's the best thing that we can do. So when we get to 9, uh, okay, we have, I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich, and I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Now, the same basic language is used in 3:9, and the argument goes that since they say they are Jews but they are not, that the Jewish people today are actually fake Jews, and some other group are the true Jews, whether it be the British Israelite movement that would claim that the Northern European peoples, like the Danes and the English people, are the true Jews, and the Jews today are not Jews. They're false Jews, they're fakers. Or the black Hebrew Israelites that make much the same claim, or even the Christian identity movements that say, well, the European white person is the true Jew, and the Jews today are fake Jews. So we are, the Germanic people are, or the Northern Europeans are. Identity movements, fake identity cults, actually use this trick a whole lot. And what they're ignoring is John's polemic use of the word Jew. See, it doesn't matter what I think the word means. What does the Bible say that word means, Jew? What does John believe that word means? And so I'm going to kind of get a start on it here. And let's get some background on here. Now, I took a commentary on Revelation, New Bible Commentary, 21st Century. D.A. Carson, who is no slouch, is the editor of this. These Jews would have taken the opportunity to inform against Christians. The Church of Smyrna later cited these Jews in allegations that Polycarp, now Polycarp was a disciple of John, resisted the state religion. Then they spoke of him as a teacher of Asia, the father of the Christians, a puller down of our gods, who teaches numbers not to sacrifice nor to worship. Such Jews are no longer worthy of the name Jew, but have become a synagogue of Satan, which reads, and they go to Numbers 16:3, which reads synagogue of the Lord in the Septuagint. The name Satan means accuser. We know that. By the way, Satan is not a name, it's actually a title. It's Ha-Satan. So it's actually a title. So it's the title Satan means. Satan's actual name is Lucifer. That's what God named him. He has become the accuser, the slanderer. The group of Jews had approximated his nature. Naturally, notice the bold writing, this is not an indication of John's view of Jews. He was a Jew himself. It reflects the depth of apostasy to which this congregation had sunk. Smyrna is actually in Turkey, and so it is not Eastern European Jews. See, the claim is that the Ashkenazi Jews in particular are fake Jews. British Israelism claims this. The Black Hebrew Israelites claim this. The Christian Identity Movement makes claims like this. There are no fake Jews at this time. There are no Eastern European or Russian Jews at this time. How did they come down to be in Turkey, and where did they come from since they didn't exist? So the historical context of a passage determines its meaning. This is Bible Study 101. We're going to see this over and over again. Everything starts with the context and the historical context. And so the historical context indicates that the statement that these say they are Jews but they are not is not a bunch of Eastern European Jews or French Jews or Germanic Jews or Jews that were part of the diaspora that went up into Europe at all. So you understand that the historical context means this can't mean that. But also what it shows is the background also lets us know that John's using this polemically. He's not using this of a certain group of people in general, the Jewish people. He's using this against a certain group of Jews that existed in Smyrna who were involved with particularly nasty behavior. That's the context of this. This was a way of speaking in John's day. Now, I took from Harvey Falk, Jesus the Pharisee, Eugene, Oregon. It's an interesting little book. But what he makes a statement as is that the language that John just used about saying they are Jews, but they are not, but rather they are a synagogue of Satan, was mild in John's day. But it was polemical. So what John's doing is what was done in that day. Let me just read the quote from Harvey Falk. It might be added the denunciation of Beth Shammai by the Essenes and the founder of Christianity almost pale in the vehement when compared to the sage Dosa ben Harkenis, labeling his brother Jonathan, and there's the Talmud tractate, by the way, Yevamot 16a, as the firstborn of Satan, Bechor Satan. And so the point that's being made here is that what John's doing was common. The Essenes use that sort of language against the followers of Rabbi Shammai. Joseph ben Harkness uses that against his own brother in the Talmud with a far greater vehement than was used even there. John's doing something that was known. He's not talking about their racial or ethnic backgrounds. He's using the polemical language of intersectarian antagonism of the first century. And what he's essentially doing is he's saying that those particular Jews who are creating problems for the Christians, by the way, it's written to the Church of Smyrna, not the British Israelites of Smyrna, not the Black Hebrew Israelites. It's written to the church. That means it's written to Christians. This is a particular congregation of Jews in Smyrna that are giving this congregation of Christians trouble. They did it with John, and they end up doing similar stuff with Polycarp, his disciple. And so this is a particular charge leveled as a particular congregation of Jewish people, not a denunciation that all Jews of Eastern European descent are not Jewish at all, or not a denunciation that the Jewish people of today are not Jews or Israelites. So he's ignoring the polemical nature. That went on during this time period. This was normal, sort of polemical. Consider it interfamily fighting, but not so much so because we're dealing with the Christians. Someone made a comment. I'm going to do that. I am thrilled with this possible order if indeed Trump ended up signing it, because the Jewish people are defined biblically as a people. Not every Jew in the Old Testament practiced Judaism. We know that because some were practicing idolatry. So if it was a religion, there'd be a bit of a problem there. You can't have a non-Christian Christian, but you can have a Jew who doesn't practice Judaism. So that's just kind of a neat little side note, along with our conversation this evening. Let's look at an important verse. Let's look at John 18:44. Now, why this is important is if you want to know how someone uses a term, if I want to know how Paul uses a term, I look at Paul's other writings. So not only do you look at the immediate context, not only do you look at the context of the book, but you look at the corpus of the individual that wrote those books. Now, we know the Holy Spirit ultimately is in charge of the scriptures, but he used a human penman. And that human penman translated that concept into specific words. And we understand what that human penman understood the concept, the word relating back to which concept by looking at the corpus. In other words, Paul thought the word law reverted back to a certain concept. And so when he uses law, we look at how he used law. Sometimes writers will use it more than one way, and then the immediate context becomes even that much more important. But the important thing you need to do is let's look at John. I said John used this type of Second Temple polemic. Well, John 8 is an example of using this Second Temple polemic here. I put a note in my slide. It may not be in yours. You can notate it if you want. But just for the sake of context, in John 8:14, he's talking to the Pharisees, which are the leaders of the Jewish people. They're a sect of Judaism. They had a great deal of power and influence. They were not the Jewish people in general. So he's speaking to the leaders. By the way, when I did a paper when I was in Feinberg, I ended up addressing this. There are multiple uses that are possible, and I end up pointing out that a lot of times when John is particularly dealing with the leaders, that's when he's at his most polemical, because he's dealing with the religious establishment of Judaism versus the believing community. Remember that both of John's letters were written around 90 AD, which means the temple was destroyed, and it's really the rabbis versus Christianity at that point, or the believing community. It's really forming rabbinical Judaism versus messianic belief at that point in history. And so when he's dealing with the leaders, he's extremely harsh because they represent the opposition. But he's not talking to Jewish people in general. He's talking to the Pharisees in 8:14, and he's addressing himself more to them because they're the ones say Abraham is our father. And so he goes on to say, if Abraham was your father, you would exhibit Abrahamic type faith and you would believe in me, but you don't believe in me. Well, how do you explain that you don't believe in me? Well, not because Abraham isn't physically your father, but although he's physically your forebearer, you are not acting like him. You are acting like the one who is shepherding you into sin, the one who is a liar, who speaks lies very naturally because he was the one who stepped in and spread and propagated the first great lie. And so he says, you are of your father, the devil. Desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Now, it doesn't mean he isn't capable of saying something that's true. It means he doesn't say it for altogether transparent and integrity purposes here. He speaks things to twist them. When he speaks a lie, he speaks it from his own resources. He doesn't have to learn it from someone else. He's pretty good at it himself. He was a liar and the father of it. In other words, he originated lying because he does that in the angelic realm. The point of the matter is he speaking about ethnicity? No, he's speaking spiritually. Is he speaking to a group of Eastern European and Russian Jews from the 19th century? No, he isn't. There is no fake Jews here. Okay? He's speaking in the temple. He is addressing Judaism. He is not speaking to a bunch of Eastern European Jews who just happen to have lighter skin than some other Jewish people who stayed in the Mideast and did not end up having their skin lightened. Okay? And by the way, when Ashkenazi Jews restart marrying with Sephardic Jews, do you know what they have? Very Jewish looking Jews. I mean, in other words, what I mean by that comment is if you take the Sephardic and you take the Ashkenazi that have been out of the land and you put them back together, what you get is what things looked like before. Okay? You're just taking the parts of the diaspora, you're reassembling them, and their children end up having the full range here. They have all the stuff because the diaspora has been brought back together. And so he's not speaking to a group of Eastern European Jews. So reading in this narrative of the Jewish people today, because their skin's too light or they're not British, as being the true Jews, or they're not something, not being the true Jews, is not the background of John. John isn't eating fish and chips when this ends up being written. So the folks that don't eat fish and chips are not the Jewish people and not Jews because they don't eat fish and chips. That's not the point of the passage. Spiritually, they are spiritually imitating Satan, so he is their discipler and in that sense father. And I need to help you understand that. The term father and son there can mean having the characteristics of or imitating, like a child imitates his father. This is very much normative. Disciples were called the children of their rabbi. It's the house of Shammai, and his disciples are his children in a spiritual sense. Paul refers to Timothy as his spiritual son. Why? He's the disciple of Paul. John says that he rejoices in this, that his children walk according to the truth, his disciples. So that's the way this is being used, and Jesus is essentially saying to the Pharisees, you say you have Abraham is your father, but you aren't acting or imitating Abraham. And if he was your father, you would imitate your father like good children. But you are imitating a father, and the father you're imitating is the devil. Because you are resisting the Messiah, the true king, and not only resisting, but militantly resisting, which is where the problem is. Now, if John had meant to indicate that the term Jew did not refer to Israelites, he would have had to state so, because not only did John understand this, but the normative usage of the term Jew in this particular time in history was of the Jewish people. And so that was the normative sort of usage. Now, how do I know that was the normative usage of the term? Well, let's do some digging here and examine the normative usage here. Um, and so we're going to just do some digging here. First, we're going to go and do something very, very smart. A dictionary helps define words, right? Now, it's interesting that the British Israelites don't take advantage of sound scholarship, neither do some of these other identity movements. The reality is, whether you like the position or not, this is scholarship. Sometimes people will say, well, he doesn't hold to our views, so nothing he says is worthwhile. That's called the genetic fallacy. It doesn't matter whether he holds to the view or not. Um, and so the important thing here is scholarship is scholarship. So what we're looking at is some scholarship here. And that's another reason why I include the references. You can see who edited this. Kittel, Bromley, and Friedrich. This is a standard sort of Bible dictionary. This is a theological dictionary of the New Testament. In sum, the New Testament uses Yahudaios, okay, Yahudaios. By the way, that's the way you'd say Jew in Greek, from Yahudah. Is either the Jew generally, whether by nationality or more specifically in terms of religious commitment to the law or to God. But in the course of New Testament development, he is the Jew who is appealing to the law and sets himself in opposition to Christ. Now, what is he saying here? Generally, this term was always used of the Jewish people. Generally, the term Jew didn't mean the fake Jews from ethnically as opposed to the real Jews. It referred generally to somebody of the ethnicity of being Jewish. And that's what he kind of is getting at with nationality. Or somebody who practiced Judaism. It came to mean, because remember the development of Judaism, the parting of the ways, it came to mean somebody in opposition to Christ because of his appealing to the law. So there was a specific, again, polemical usage, and then the general usage was to the Jewish people. Let's just go a little further. Let's pull out the same dictionary. He goes on. It is quite natural that that name derives from the territory. Hebrew is Yahudi from Yahudah. So if you want to know where the Greek comes from, Judaios, it comes from Yahudah, which is Judah. Isn't that interesting? So who's from the tribe of Judah? The Jewish people are connected to the tribe of Judah. Originally it denotes an inhabitant of the kingdom of province of Judah, but it came to be used generally for a member of the people of Israel to denote not a member of the Jewish state or an inhabitant of Judea, but a member of this people. In other words, a Jew is a member of the Jewish people, and it was used specifically of Judah. Remember that the northern kingdom was taken captive, and so generally people started referring to the Jewish people in terms of the southern kingdom, Yahudi, and then because the northern kingdom was carried away, people started thinking of the Jewish people only in terms of the southern kingdom. And so the Jewish people are the Jews from Judah. And remember, too, the remnant, faithful remnant of the northern tribes came down. I am not a big believer in the lost tribes of Israel because James writes to the 12 tribes, and I don't know that his letter got lost. In other words, if he's writing to all 12 of the tribes, they must not have been lost at the time that James is writing, which would place it after the exile of the northern kingdom. Out of the same dictionary, page 159, the term Jew is never used of a separate people from the Jewish people. The Jews, Paul's kinsmen, according to the flesh, are the Israelites. Now, the Greek is used, Yisrael litai. Yisrael litai. I'm having trouble with the Greek word. It's a big, long Greek word. It's up there. As such, they enjoyed the blessings enumerated in verse 4. Even carnal Israel enjoyed these blessings. Israel was bound to the law. It seeks righteousness through the law. By the way, what's the big problem here? Well, the big problem is seeking righteousness and sanctification through the law. So any group that's seeking righteousness or sanctification through the law falls under these denunciations in a sense, or these wrong position that Paul is discussing. Any attempt to seek sanctification or salvation through the law is what Paul is bothered at. It misses the righteousness of God. Previously, Israel was disobedient. The point is, the Jews, as this dictionary points out, are the Israelites. Someone brought up a good point. We know that Anna was from the tribe of Asher. So tribes are listed, lineages are preserved up until Rome. I don't know how complete the records were, but they must have been pretty complete. Check out Chronicles, because those are the records you would certainly have seen. Okay. The distinction between physical and spiritual Jews is never ethnic or racial. Understand that. Whenever someone says the Israelites are this people and the Jews are this people, Paul never ever, or John, or anyone else in the New Testament never makes a distinction between Jew and Israelite on the basis of ethnic or racial bounds. In other words, ethnically, the Jews are the Israelites are the Jews. There are no fake other ethnic group calling themselves the Jews. There is no fake other ethnic group calling themselves Israelites when the New Testament is written. How do I know this? Well, look at the way Paul uses the term Jew. He is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is of the heart, not of the spirit, not of the letter, whose praise is from men, not from God. Now, Paul's making a distinction between spiritual and carnal Jews. But is that distinction on ethnic or nationality? No, the distinction is spiritual. So whenever someone talks about fake Jews, there aren't any fake Jews in the sense of ethnically. There are spiritual Jews and carnal or unspiritual or fleshly Jews. That's the only distinction that the New Testament ever makes. In fact, Paul set the pattern. Now, here's a good point that really needs to be kept in mind. What religion does Paul say he had? Well, interestingly enough, he talks about his former way of life in Galatians chapter 1:14. I was advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries of my own nation. He's connecting Judaism with his nation. Did you notice that? Being more exceedingly zealous for the traditions of who? The traditions of his fathers. By the way, that means forefathers. I mean, it doesn't mean just his dad. Okay, we want to kind of be clear on that. It means his forebears or his ancestors. That's not accidental. And so he's deliberately tying Judaism with the religion of his nation at the time, and he's connecting it with his former way of life. What's Judaism? What is this Judaism that he was so connected to? Judaiosmos is the Greek. Judaiosmos. It's a system of Jewish beliefs and customs. Judaism, the practice of Judaism. And they even quote this passage. This is Lowen Needham, a Greek English lexicon of the New Testament. Excellent for dealing with stuff like this. And they have basically where he states and uses the word Judaios. I was ahead of my fellow Jews of my age in the practice of Judaism, is the way this verse should be understood. In fact, Judaiosmos is often rendered as the Jewish religion. The Jewish religion. The religion that was common to the Jewish people. Wasn't common to other peoples much at the time. It was not the normative religion of the rest of the world. It wasn't the normative religion of people in Russia, Ukrainian, and Poland at the time. It wasn't the normative religion of Gaul, which is what France used to be called. It wasn't the normative religion of Britain, the area below Hadrian's Wall. It wasn't the normal religion of those people. It was the normative or common religion or the general religion that the Jewish people followed in Paul's day. There were no fake Jews following Judaism. The consistent pattern of following Judaism belonged to the Jews or Jewish people. And Paul is connecting it to the religion of his forebears. What did the Jewish people practice? Judaism. What did they practice consistently? Judaism. Someone's connecting my pronunciation. But there was a wall that separated part of Britain. It's as far as the Roman Empire ever got in that part of the world, with most of the Scots and the Scots were known as the Picts, or the Irish being above that territory. Now let's talk about a third point. Let's look at Romans chapter 3. What advantage has the Jew, or what profits circumcision directly related to the Jew? By the way, it wasn't common practice in Britain to circumcise during the time of the Picts, Scots, and Celtic Britons. It wasn't done. The Roman Empire didn't have it as common tradition to circumcise their sons. Remember, they inherited their thinking from the Greeks that the human body was beautiful, and to deface the male body in any way would have been abhorrent. That was not a common practice among those European groups. And so Paul's emphasizing who the Jew is, the one who was practicing that since the time of Abraham, much in every way. Well, what advantage do they have? Paul said, they're not saved on the basis of ethnic background. So what advantage could they possibly have? Well, chiefly because to them were committed the oracles of God. Now, why is this important? Who was given custody of the oracles of God? By God. So let's look at the chain of custody. Who has preserved the Hebrew writings and the language of Hebrew? Because if they were given custody, well, let's see if we can figure out who was given custody, by who preserved stuff. Who translated the Hebrew scriptures? We're going to look at the Targunim, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and the Masoretic text. The Targums are Jewish translations of the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic, not Greek. What were they translated for? Well, for the benefit of synagogue worshipers. Oh, who do you think most of them were? Well, most of them were Jewish people, i.e., Israelites. I mean, that's who I would assume would be the major group of people going to synagogue. When I used to go with my grandfather, those were like the major people going to synagogue. And historically, you have no reason to believe otherwise. So, that's kind of what we're looking at there. So, this is Aramaic. By the way, these precede Jesus. Now, although they weren't written down and codified, they were used in the synagogues. They began to get written down. So people were listening to the scriptures being read. They started writing these down, and we have the Targumim. Okay. Well, who preserved them? Well, guess what? Jewish people who came back from Babylon preserved them. Did folks from West Africa preserve them? No. Were there folks from ancient Britain that came down and preserved the Targunims? No. Targumim, sorry. No. Don't think so. Why? They were being recited in the synagogues. And there's no record of great British people um, coming down from Britain to do the translation into Aramaic of the Hebrew scriptures for Jewish people who were going to synagogue. That just doesn't make any historic sense. We don't have a delegation from Africa coming to do all that translation work. Where is mention of all these Africans? Uh, do we have uh, do we have white identity movement people from the South, say Carolina, going to Babylon to translate the Targumim? Well, obviously not, because they wouldn't have been the people living in South Carolina at the time anyway. So, how does that work? Uh, Really kind of problematic stuff here. What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, Qumran. Well, who lived at Qumran? A bunch of British folks that had migrated, complete with passports. Oh, bunch of Africans. No, I don't think so. The Qumran community seems to be a Yassine community. It aligns itself with, the writings are consistent with the fact that the Yassines ended up leaving the synagogue. Um, and they were very, I sought the synagogue, the temple, because they were very unhappy with the temple. Do understand that Rome sort of appoints a high priest. They view the temple leadership as corrupt. They go off and do their own thing. The Essene community's beliefs were very understood. Cephas makes mention, Pliny makes mention of them, and they match the descriptions of the Qumran community. Uh, so we have every reason to believe that the Qumran uh, sect uh, and the Essenes probably are really closely connected. Um, where did I get this information? Well, Benjamin D. Spinoza, Yassine et al., Berry, Lexic, Bible Dictionary. It's all part of Logos, by the way. If you don't have Logos and you got a sizable Christmas gift, you may want to look into Logos Bible software. I don't get any money for saying this. Some free resources for saying this would be nice, but I don't. But it's a really good. Let's just define these Essenes, okay? This is Lexam Cultural Ontological Glossary. Isn't that a mouthful, right? A Jewish religious party who saw themselves as the true people of God and retreated into the desert to practice purity and devotion until the coming of the Lord. Yes, they were waiting. They were very eschatological and had a real vision for the coming of the kingdom of God, and their writings are really quite fascinating. Here's the important thing: uh, were they an African religious party? No. They were a Jewish religious party. So the Targums were translated by Jewish people who must be Jews, because chain of custody here, they were entrusted with the word of God. Um, they're you know, check it out. I mean, who are these people who are doing the transmission and translation of these texts? Well, in the case of the Targunim, it's Jewish people. In the case of the Essenes, well, they're Jewish people. They're part of a Jewish religious party. Um, oh, what about the Septuagint? Jewish scholars produced a Greek translation of the Old Testament known as the Septuagint. Why? Because according to tradition, 70 rabbis interestingly enough. Jewish rabbis worked in 70 huts by the sea to produce it. Ethnic tension in the city grew as the Jewish population increased and prospered. The tensions erupted in AD 42 into riots by the Greeks and the expulsion of Jews from the Gentile sections in which they had spread. Jewish commercial success, particularly the wheat trade, led to infused anti-Semitism. A similar story. This is out of Alexandria Baker's Encyclopedia of the Bible, another little resource I have. Who produced it? Jewish scholars seem to have produced the Septuagint. How interesting. Now, I am not disrespecting the work of the church fathers in propagating the scriptures in their letters. Neither am I discussing the work of Jerome, which translated the Bible into Latin. Okay, later on, the church takes over the work of helping to transmit the scriptures. But those are the Christians. They're not the guys from Britain coming down in a special delegation to prove that the Brits are the true Jews. They're not Africans who are the true Jews. Okay, the church as Christians preserved the scriptures because the scriptures became important to the Christian church. But at this point in time, who is responsible for the translation and transmission of the Hebrew text? Well, the Masoretic text, which, by the way, is the text that's pretty much used today. They go through the stages here. This might be good for you to see. I don't know why you're not seeing all of this. Might have clicked off here. I'm going to increase this slide and take a bit of a risk here. Just because I really want you to see it. So I'm going to blank myself out for a second here. And I'm going to transition to this for a second. And I'm going to pull this up because the writing's a little small here. I'm sorry about that. In Judaism, a succession of scholars were charged with the standardization and preservation of the biblical text. The Sepharim, that would be the scribes, by the way. That's the Hebrew for the scribes. The Sepharim, meaning scribes, were the Jewish scribes and custodians of the text between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC. Who is preserving the text? The Jewish people. Jewish scribes. Jewish scholars. Okay. The Zagaroth, or Zagaoth, pairs of textual scholars were assigned to the task in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, so right before Jesus. The Tanaim, by the way, those first two stages are stages in the development of the Talmud. Okay, the pairs and the Tanaim, the repeaters or teachers, were active to 200, and the work of the Tanaim can be found in the Midrash, okay? Tosafot and Talmud. Not as important, okay? The Talmud gradually was written between 100 and 500. There's a Babylonian and a lot of history here. Between 500 and 950, the Masoretes added vowel pointings and pronunciation marks to the continental text received from the Sepharim on the basis of the Masorah tradition handed down to them. The Masoretes were scribes who codified and wrote down the oral criticisms and remarks on the Hebrew text. Two major schools of Masoretic activity. The one you will be most familiar with is the Ben Asher, with his son Aaron and Moses Naphtali in the late 9th and 10th centuries. The Ben Asher text is the standard text for Hebrew Bible today and the best represented by the Codex Leningradensia. And that's just a lot of material here. Okay. Here's what you need to know. Who's been preserving and transmitting the Hebrew text? Jewish people. Not some group of Africans who are the true Jewish people. Not folks from Carolina. Okay. Not British Israelites who came down as a delegation, have been preserving the text with an unbroken chain of transmitted Hebrew text from Jesus's day, before Jesus's day until now. You have an unbroken chain of entrusted, transmitted, translated text by Jews from before Jesus till today. Now, why am I doing this exercise here? The Jewish people were entrusted with the scriptures. How do we know? Because they've been the custodian of the Hebrew text since before Jesus until now. Not counting the prophets and Ezra, but just even you want to go, where did things go from Ezra? From before Jesus' day until now, the Jewish people have been the custodians of the text. God was demonstrating through their transmission and translation of the Hebrew text that they are the Jews of Romans 3. If they weren't the Jews of Romans 3, we would not see a pedigree of transmission and translation of Hebrew texts being preserved and spread by them. Let me put it this way: if you don't have the papers, you're not the breed. And the chain of papers and custody of those papers have been in the hands of Jewish people. Therefore, they've got the chain of papers. They've got the pedigree of transmission and translation of the text. Therefore, they are the Jews who were entrusted with the scriptures. And those that claim to be the breed better have that chain of texts, transmission and translation, to prove they were the ones entrusted with them. So let's start getting to some conclusions, because we've gotten a lot of Bible history tonight. I'm really kind of pleased with that. You understand better the transmission and chain of transmission and translation of Hebrew texts, from the Targums to the Septuagint to the Sopharim and Tanaim, to the Mezorites. We have an unbroken chain. John is using the language of polemic. We saw that in John chapter 8. The Jewish people have been demonstrated to be the Jews entrusted with the scriptures through their unbroken chain of transmission and translation of those texts. Revelation 2:9 and 3:9 is about spiritual condition. We know that because of the background. These are two churches in Turkey, and these are two Jewish congregations giving those churches trouble. And so from those evidences, we can see that it is just silly to read those verses that way, because the historic history of the passage, the way John uses those terms, is not consistent with viewing that there's some other ethnic group of people out there somewhere who view it this way. It's not consistent with the immediate context. It's not consistent with the use of the term Jew in terms of the term itself or the term of Judaism, which is used in the New Testament. And there's even more done where if I stuck the term Jew in the passage, it wouldn't make any sense. Not all those who are of Israel are Israel. Well, if I'm a British Israelite, then I'd have to say that proves that the British Israelites or Israelism is not Jews. If I go to black Hebrew Israelites, I'd say, well, the verse, not all those who are of Israel are Israel, prove that the black Hebrew Israelites aren't Israel. I could do the same thing with the passages. The usages don't match. Not John's usage and not Paul's usage. And remember, Paul's usage is before John's in 90 AD. So he's already establishing the pattern as to how these terms are used before John does his writing. So there's no reason to accept this very false interpretation of things. This is just kind of garbage interpretation. And so there's just no reason to go ahead and accept this. I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. But that does not mean I will not be with you tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be a little bit exciting. We will discuss what sexual ethics did Jesus hold to. So that will be exciting and a little unusual. But we'll be looking at Matthew. And in Matthew 5, Jesus lays out the sexual ethics that he believes should be upheld. So that is tomorrow. Well, maybe if I finish this poem, I will stick it up on Patreon early and actually read it to you. I'm actually writing for the first time in a couple years. I have not written much poetry, but I'm trying to get a little more in touch with that part of things. I used to write a lot of it. So I'm going to look for some questions. Someone asked me a question. I'll have to get back to her um, or him. I'm sorry, not her. I'm thinking of the wrong person who asked a question. Um, but she asked about he. Man, I was asked about Rabbi Akiva. I was asked about Rabbi Akiva. So, um, um, and so I was also asked about how to navigate the Talmud. So that individual isn't there, but they will be getting material from me. If you send me questions via email or text or a Patreon, I will get back to you. And I just want to encourage you. I welcome those things. So I've already had some good questions sent my way through Becky and others. Um, I'm looking at Adrian, and someone said silent H, and that would indicate a breathing mark in the Greek. Sorry, my mind's going into Greek now. So it has been good having you guys here. I am not, you came in, you joined. I'm so excited. Um, and the stream held out. Tomorrow we will do something different. We'll get back into Matthew and get frighteningly practical. At least I think it's frighteningly practical because Jesus said it. It's about a pretty practical area of life. Until then, I'm going to start to sign off and get something to drink. Oh, by the way, just for those folks watching, um, um, I think I've heard word from Vocab that I'm going to go over and do a joint broadcast with David Wood on his station. And if I can get permission to go ahead, put the URL up, I can also maybe do it as a premiere for you guys if you don't see it on his station. But I'm kind of excited to go over to his place and do some taping. So that will probably be Saturday. God bless you this Advent season. Let me just throw up the credits real quick. If your name does not appear on them, that's because you're wonderful and you support us through chosen people and you're a tremendous blessing. And some who have even supported us through chosen people have even sent personal gifts. And you guys are sending personal gifts through Patreon. Nobody should feel left out. This is to keep a promise. And this is something that I said I would do. So I'm doing what I said, but I want you chosen people and people who um, have sent me personal gifts on top of that, just to know you're wonderful. You're wonderful, whatever part of that you've done. Um, but I have to keep my word. And again, I have different mechanisms for thanking different people, but I want to thank y'all. Whatever part you played, You are a part of this grand adventure. You are with me when I go out and I hit the streets. You are there. And so look for your name, but if you don't see it, God's recorded it in heaven, and you'll probably be getting a thank you card or be thanked in some way. It's just different mechanisms. I want you all to feel appreciated because I appreciate you greatly. Well, as those credits roll, I'm going to get set to sign off. And yep, vocab is the master of the Black Hebrew Israelite thing. But I just had to address this. So, send good night and blessings.